bloody horror story starring an anthropomorphic panda named Noir. Chapter 1: The Arrival. The morning mist clung to the decaying grandeur of Hotel Murio. Standing before its rusted gates was Noir, an anthropomorphic panda. How old she was, even she didn't know. She was tall and thin, with midnight fur, as dark as the swirling black fog that swirled around her feet. Since she could remember, she'd been alone, always alone. Now she stood before the abandoned hotel, drawn by an unseen force. The carpet was threadbare, the wallpaper peeling. But one thing struck her as odd. Despite the ancient architecture, the room was devoid of dust, suggesting no one had entered for a very long time. Its walls were lined with warped mirrors that reflected distorted images of screaming children, cages filled with animals being skinned alive, and flashes of a past life that was never hers. But at the end of the corridor, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. A cold, sterile laboratory stretched before her. Scattered across the floor were files bearing one chilling title: Experiment No. 313. Fusion of animal spirit with human essence. She was the final experiment, the culmination of years of research. But how? Why? Was she meant to be here? The key was still in her hand, her clothes torn and bloodied. She had no recollection of how she got there. Had she escaped room 313? Was she the real Noir or merely a copy? She wasn't sure. But in her pocket, she found a photo. A picture of her own body lying lifeless in room 313. And as she stared at the haunting image, she realized one terrifying fact. This wasn't a nightmare, it was her new reality. And she was trapped forever in a bloody horror story. Yet the air was thick with the scent of decay. She reached the third floor, yet it wasn't what she expected. Instead of finding room 313, she was met with an endless repetition of the same hallway. Confused and a little frightened, she turned around, but the staircase had vanished. Trapped, she found herself descending back to the second floor, then the first. Over and over, she climbed and climbed, yet the third floor remained tantalizingly out of reach. Then, as she finally reached the third floor for the 100th time, a message materialized on the wall as if written in invisible ink. It read, "Room 313 doesn't open from the outside, but from within." And suddenly, the answer to the riddle hit her. She understood. She wasn't just a guest at Hotel Murio. She was a prisoner. And the room wasn't a place, but a state of being. Above her, the sign creaked in the wind, warning, "Hotel Murio, no entry after sunset." But the wrought iron gates were open, beckoning her inside. And as if echoing her thoughts, the wind whispered through the trees, urging her forward. In her hand, she clutched a heavy iron key, cold and damp. Engraved on its face was the number 313. She didn't know who had put it in her hands, but she knew she must enter the hotel. Its voice was a horrifying cacophony, like multiple people speaking at once. "Noir, your mind is open, but your heart is still locked." It handed her a rusty knife and rasped, "Slaughter your original self and stay here forever, or escape and let us in." Noir screamed as the room around her began to collapse. Mirrors shattered, reality bent and twisted, and in the end, only the echo of her own screams remained. As she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her with a resounding boom, plunging her into total darkness. Chapter 2: The Guests Who Never Leave. She fumbled for the light switch, but it was no use. The room was plunged in eternal night. The silence was deafening. Then, as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she saw a large grandfather clock dominated the lobby, its pendulum swinging eerily back and forth, counting down the seconds in an unending loop. Tick-tock, tick-tock. But it wasn't just the clock. There were others here, trapped in this timeless void. She noticed them everywhere, frozen in mid-conversation, caught in mid-laughter. Their eyes blank, vacant, staring straight ahead. They were stuck here forever, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die, But there was something else. Something about these figures both intrigued and terrified. Noir. They were all wearing name tags that read, "Do not feed after midnight." As she made her way through the lobby, she noticed that many of the name tags were smudged or missing, as if some guests had tried desperately to remove them. Then, as she neared the grand staircase, she saw one face that stopped her in her tracks. It was a panda, its eyes wide and pleading, its mouth frozen in a silent scream. And as she stared at it, she realized with a jolt that the face was hers. Chapter 3. A Body Without a Shadow. The stairs groaned under Noir's weight as she ascended to the third floor. Chapter 4. Experiment 313. Suddenly, a hidden door in the wall creaked open, revealing a long, dark hallway. Chapter 5. Not meant for humans. Then from the shadows, a creature emerged. It was a grotesque parody of a human, half man, and half horribly mutated panda. Final chapter, Morning Never Comes. When Noir awoke, she found herself on a bed in the middle of a scorched forest.